Hi, everyone, and welcome to Be True, my podcast about the writing I love and the writing I do. I promise I won't rhyme the whole time. I'm John Tessitore, and today, something a little different. A story from my professional life. But, as always, you can find all of my creative work at johntessitore.com. This week, Elon Musk announced that he was sharpening his sword to cut the National Endowment for the Humanities, the federal agency that funds humanities programming around the country. Here's a quick description from the NEH website. NEH is an independent federal agency that supports the humanities in every state and U.S. jurisdiction. Since 1965, NEH has awarded over $6 billion to support museums, historic sites, universities, teachers, libraries, documentary filmmakers, public TV and radio stations, research institutions, scholars, and local humanities programming. The NEH is a small but important agency with a minuscule budget that just happens to keep a certain kind of public education alive in America. It does so in part by funding a network of state and territorial humanities councils. In other words, the NEH is a national hub surrounded by lots and lots of local spokes and lots of good people trying to do good work for good communities. Once upon a time, for a year, I served on my local cultural council, a city-sponsored organization that received most of its money from the Massachusetts State Cultural Council, which received some of its money from the NEH. In other words, that's the mechanism by which a small amount of federal money trickles down, all the way down, to my small city, where we helped to fund modest creative endeavors and concerts, and ran an art competition in every school within city limits, private and public. That was my big event, actually. I spearheaded a contest that culminated in a huge art show at the local library. To make sure that every student in the city had a chance to participate without burdening overburdened parents, for example, I personally drove to every school in the district and picked up hundreds of submissions. That's the kind of work we were doing. A local volunteer council with funding from the state, with funding from the federal government, distributing small grants for local events and managing art competitions for kids, and making sure that every kid had a chance to participate regardless of their economic circumstances. A tiny, 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 tiny crumb of the federal budget was an undeniable good within my community. And that is what Musk has cut and continues to cut when he cuts the NEH. But that is not the story I want to tell today. The story I want to tell is somehow even more personal. Back in June of 2013, I led a campaign that is probably my greatest professional achievement to date, and definitely the highest profile effort of my career. The campaign supported a national commission requested by members of the U.S. Congress, a bipartisan call from members of the House and Senate, and organized by my employer at the time, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The commission was known as the Commission on the Humanities and Social Sciences, and the final report was called The Heart of the Matter. It also bore the predictable and unfortunate committee-created subtitle, The Humanities and Social Sciences for a Vibrant, Competitive, and Secure Nation. Blech. For 2 years before the report was published, I was the lead staffer at every committee meeting and the lead writer of the report itself. For 2 years after it was published, I led public outreach in at least 26 states and was a regular presence in Washington, D.C., in the halls of Congress. In effect, I was a traveling humanities salesman. A Willy Loman of Shakespeare. The presidents of Duke and Harvard and UPenn and Stanford were members of the commission, but so were Ken Burns and Yo-Yo Ma and George Lucas and John Lithgow and Emmylou Harris and corporate leaders and judges and journalists and ambassadors and engineers and tech experts and political figures, more than 50 people in all. An extraordinary collection of leaders. And the vast majority of them really participated in the work. They came to meetings in person before Zoom. George Lucas in person before Zoom. And they debated. And then they went on the road in support of our recommendations. I'm not kidding. I flew in a prop plane with the Supreme Court Justice. I shared a stage with John Lithgow. I worked on a short video with Ken Burns' documentary team. What was it all about? Here's the epigram published on the inside cover of The Heart of the Matter. Who will lead America into a bright future? Citizens who are educated in the broadest possible sense so that they can participate in their own governance and engage with the world. An adaptable and creative workforce. Experts in national security equipped with the cultural understanding, knowledge of social dynamics, and language proficiency to lead our foreign service and military through complex global conflicts. Elected officials and the broader public who exercise civil political discourse, founded on an appreciation of the ways our differences and commonalities have shaped our rich history. We must prepare the next generation to be these future leaders. Not bad, right? I think that was written by one of our chairs, Duke President Dick Broadhead. For 2 years, we took this message everywhere, to small town halls and big theaters, to PBS, NPR, and Stephen Colbert's Comedy Central show. The Andrew W. Mellon Foundation gave us a lot of money to do this work, and its president at the time, Don Randall, instructed us to move the dial on the national discourse, which had been dominated by science and tech talk for a while, at least since the dot-com boom of the 90s, to the exclusion of everything else. And that's what we did. We linked arms with science and we defended the liberal arts. And for a brief moment, we moved the dial. And it was pretty exciting for a while. Looking back 12 years now, it feels like we failed. Maybe we did. I have a lot of ideas about why we failed. If you read my Substack posts, you know I'm full of ideas. Nevertheless, I find this failure impossible to accept, and I'm not willing to give up. In fact, I believe that we need to redouble our efforts in order to save American education, and that's why I'm calling it to your attention right now, in this very unusual episode of Be True. Of course, our Heart of the Matter report offered full-throated support for the NEH, and now the NEH is in real trouble. It may even be eliminated by the time you hear this episode. But the humanistic ideal doesn't die just because Elon Musk and Donald Trump and fucking Linda McMahon are trying to starve it to death. Here's another quote from the report, from my friend Esther McIntosh, who was the president of the Federation of State Humanities Councils at the time The Heart of the Matter was published. I think Esther captured the stakes of our work better than anyone. By educating low-income people in the full range of humanities disciplines, by bringing new immigrants into the fabric of their American communities, by forging partnerships with state and local governments to strengthen the cultural and educational infrastructure of their states, the Humanities Councils are making real the idea that a wise and visionary citizenry is the underpinning of a healthy civic life and a thriving democracy. Do you hear how much of that quote is challenged by Musk and Trump and their goons? Let me read it again. By educating low-income people in the full range of humanities disciplines, by bringing immigrants into the fabric of their American communities, by forging partnerships with state and local governments to strengthen the cultural and educational infrastructure of their states, the Humanities Councils are making real the idea that a wise and visionary citizenry is the underpinning of a healthy civic life and a thriving democracy. Everything about this quote is controversial now. But should it be? Many of the great universities are running in fear from this kind of messaging. But should they? Of course, the answer to both questions is fuck no. But that's how far we've come since 2013, or how far we've fallen. I'm devastated, but I'm not defeated, and neither should you be. One more quote. This one from Chuck Vest, who had been the president of the National Academy of Engineering. As an internationally respected spokesperson for science, Chuck Vest was a very important member of our efforts on behalf of the humanities. And here's what he said. All the scientific and technological skills of which we can conceive will not solve our world problems if we do not build and adapt a base of human and cultural understanding, ethical and moral underpinnings, sensible rules of law for the 21st century, and integration with the insights, inspirations, and communications of the arts. And there you have it. What's the point of all of this? It's simple. Don't let them ban your books, stifle your discourse, censor your speech, halt your research, abduct your scholars, or direct your education to suit their needs. not in the sciences, not in the social sciences, not in the humanities. Don't let them destroy what they don't understand. And so, in the hope that we can come together once again to fight the scourge of ignorance that is sweeping this nation, this is John Tessitore concluding another installment of Be True. If you've listened this long, thank you. You can find all of my work at johntessitore.com. But first, I don't know. Find some way to be a pain in the ass. In any way you can. Make them squirm. Special thanks to me for today's theme music, which I call F-Chord. Maybe we'll talk again. And if you enjoyed this little podcast, leave some stars or a review and support the work through the Ko-Fi account listed in the episode description, ko-fi.com/John Tessitore, and tell your friends. In the meantime, I gotta feed the dog. All right, Luna, I'm coming.